everybody, Tori here today with a Scrap Your Scraps type project. I am doing a post for Wild Whisper today and I kind of ran out of paper. So I thought that I could use my Wild Whisper scraps to create some cards today. So earlier this month I showed you a really awesome travel themed mini album and I saved all of my scraps from that, and these are kind of the pieces that I have left. These white pieces are just the back of the placement cards or whatever you call them. So I have a bunch of those, and then I also had just a bunch of strips of paper and some branding strips here. I have a couple pieces that I've cut out of the cut apart sheets, and then I have a few journaling cards left to mixed in this pile. And then I also grabbed out all of my other Wild Whisper stuff from like other past kits too, so you'll see kind of like a whole combination here, and it's all just scraps, so no full 12 by 12 sheets, just smaller pieces. Some of them are like half sheets or things like this. And the great thing about Wild Whisper is that I think that their style is pretty cohesive across different collections. So they come out with a new collection every other month, and the great thing is that I kind of feel like all of the things coordinate together. So I think it's going to work to save all of my Wild Whisper scraps together and see what I can create using these scraps. So I'm going to use the back of these placement cards that you get in with the paper packs and the journaling card packs. And I'm going to use that so I have some white cardstock, because honestly you should use everything. And then I'm going to use all of these scraps and branding strips and journaling cards that I have cut up and for some reason saved. I saved them for this project here. There's a couple pieces in here that were just from leftovers from that mini album that I made, so they're not Wild Whisper, but most of this is Wild Whisper scraps. Like these branding strips are really awesome, and there's some journaling cards strewn. I think strewn is the word I was looking for. Strewn throughout here, like some that are cut up and things like that. So I feel like it would be fun to do a Scrap Your Scraps project using all of these. So I noticed the other day that my card stash, like my stash of handmade cards, is getting like super low. So I thought it would be kind of fun to do some Scrap Your Scraps type handmade cards and kind of bring you guys along for the ride for how I make these. And I'm going to be using Wild Whisper scraps and things like that for this. And then I also pulled out a bunch of my punches just because I thought it would be kind of fun to use my scraps with my punches. It's kind of one of my favorite techniques for scrapping my scraps. So I'll just move this to the side for a second and show you guys the punches I pulled out. I don't know if I'll use all of these, but I thought I would just show you which ones I grabbed out. I don't have a huge stash. This is almost all of my, I probably have like maybe 5 more, so I don't have that many. Maybe it's a lot for some people, but not a lot for others. So I grabbed this 2-inch square punch, and this is Recollections, which is the Michaels brand. I grabbed 2 border punches, and these are the only 2 border punches I have, but they're my favorite because I love border punches. They're just that punches are really expensive, especially in Canada, so I don't really buy them, but I love border punches. So I have 2 of them, and I definitely want to try to use them. So this one is a Martha Stewart punch, and then this one is an EK Success scallop. I grabbed out this octagon, and this is Fiskars. I grabbed out this circle punch, Fiskars, and I grabbed out this scallop circle. Hopefully you can see that. Also Fiskars. And I grabbed out this little 5/8 of an inch circle. I don't know. I just kind of grabbed out some random punches that I felt like I hadn't used in a while and was like, let's make it work. So I'm going to get to going and create some fun cards using my Wild Whisper scraps, and I'm going to bring you guys along. I'll probably stick you on fast forward for this, but I'll show you guys the cards when I'm all done, and I'll come back and talk about them. Just as a quick side note, because I often get asked this question, if you are interested in punches and you're wondering like which ones to invest in, personally my favorites are the Fiskars brand and the Martha Stewart brand, just because I find they're really easy to use. Like the Fiskars ones, you kind of do this, like you just squeeze them, and that works really well. And they're good quality, and I like the Martha Stewart ones go like this. But the Recollection ones are nice too. I just find that the Recollection ones, like the bigger images, tend to be a little harder to use. I don't know, but honestly, any punches really matter. It doesn't matter which kind you use. Okay, so let's get started making some Scrap Your Scraps cards.
So the first thing I need to do is I need to make some card bases. So I didn't have any pre-made ones, so I just went to my stash and pulled out a bunch of random pieces of cardstock. Basically, I just grabbed all the different cardstocks that I have. I really don't have a lot of cardstock. I need to get some, I don't know, and I cut them down. And if you're wondering, if you're not a card maker and you want to know what size I cut them down, I cut them to 8.5 by 5.5. And then what I did was I scored each of them at 4 1/4, so that I could fold the 8.5 side in half basically. I just used my scoreboard to do that. You don't need to use a scoreboard, you could just fold them. I just find it works a little bit better. And then I just use my bone folder to crease those edges. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to work to putting together my cards. Now, while I'm doing this, I just wanted to state, like right from the beginning, that I am not a professional card maker. There are so many incredible card makers on YouTube that you can go check out. But what I wanted to do today was more inspire you to use your scraps to make your cards. So I don't know if I'll really be like teaching you anything, but maybe just giving you some inspiration is kind of what I was hoping for. So I kind of have a formula that I like to use when I'm making cards like this. I typically like to make them in bulk, so I'll make a bunch at one time. And I decided today to make 12, I think. So what I did was, the first thing I did was I grabbed all of my scraps and I picked out the biggest pieces and I cut little pieces into like rectangles that I could use for the main part of the card. So the pieces that I cut down are about 4 inches by 5 1/4. So they're just slightly smaller than the front of the card base. And that way you have a little bit of the edge of the card base showing, and then you have this piece of Wild Whisper paper that's kind of like a template or a mat basically for the card, if that makes sense. I hope that I'm explaining it well. You'll see as I'm going along. So I had all those random cards, and then I had all these pieces of paper that I had cut down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each card base and I'm going to pick which piece of pattern paper I'm going to mat on there for the mat basically. And like I said, I like to do this in bulk, so I typically will just kind of like do it all at the same time. So you can see, instead of working on one card at a time, I'm working on all 12 all at the same time, and I kind of feel like it makes it faster. I don't know if that makes sense. So I made 12 cards, and I think that in total it took me maybe 2 hours. So maybe an hour and a half, a little less than that. So it was pretty quick. And then I just kind of have used all of my papers to cut down these mats, and then I'm just going to kind of mat each of those cards. And I am using my glue gun today to just glue those down. So I just put like a little dollop of glue in each corner and then glue that down, and And there you go. It's kind of like a quick process. So my suggestion is if you're going to make some cards from your scraps that you kind of follow like this, and you make all the cards kind of similar in terms of the fact that they all have a very similar style, but you're kind of doing the exact same thing over and over. So I kind of like doing that. I just feel like it makes card making really easy. And it's a perfect way to use up a ton of your scraps. Like, I think I used up about half of my scraps just from like making these cards, which is pretty epic. Like, I need to do it more often. And then what I do is I just kind of stick all those cards into my card organization thing in my cupboard, and then I have cards ready to go for when I need them. And that's typically how I do it. Like, I like giving people handmade cards or using them for thank you cards or weddings or birthdays or whatever. But I tend to not make them when I need them. Instead, I just make like a whole bunch of them and then stick them in my stash, and then I'll be good to go. So last time I made cards on my channel, I made a bunch of like birthday cards kind of thing. Today I thought I would just make like thank you cards and I'm thinking of you kind of cards, that kind of idea. So that's what I'll be going with, and I feel like these Wild Whisper scraps are perfect for that. So once I had created that little mat on top of all of the cards, I'm just going through my scraps again, and I'm going to just separate out the branding strips. And I did that because I knew that I really wanted to be purposeful to use these branding strips on the cards. So I figured if I kind of just set them aside in a different pile than the rest of the scraps, then I was more likely to actually use them. So I've just put the scraps on my left and the branding strips on my right, and then I'm hoping that that will inspire me to actually use them. And I was just kind of taking a look to see what scraps I had of branding strips. Some of them are full branding strips, and then some of them are just little pieces too. So that worked out well. So the next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to add another piece of pattern paper to each of these cards. Now, normally if I was doing this, I would use a 3x4 journaling card because I think it's like the perfect size to go on the front of a card. And I don't know, it just is kind of like a nice size. So you have that back mat, and then you have a 3x4 card. But I didn't have any 3x4 cards left. I guess I used them all in my last mini album. So I used the rest of the scraps and just cut down a bunch of 3x4 pieces of paper. And I don't think I am able to get enough 3x4 pieces, so I do make some that are like slightly smaller. But I think the rectangle is a good size, so I did try to go with rectangles. And because the card base is a rectangle, I feel like having another rectangle that's like slightly smaller is a good kind of rule of thumb for making these cards. I don't know. I'm trying to make it easy and trying to find ways to use up my scraps, so for me this works and it makes it easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to count to make sure that I have enough and sort them out, and then I'm going to pick one of these for each of the cards and just have like a little piece that will go on each one. So I kind of just picked up a piece and then decided which card it would go on. And that's kind of how I will do this next step. So again, it made it easy because I was doing all of this at one time instead of doing one card at a time. I just knew that I wanted to have a 3x4 piece of paper for each of the cards. So I kind of just go along and see what matches or what works. And the nice thing about using coordinating collections from Wild Whisper is that I know that they will go together. Like, you'll be able to find things that match and things that coordinate. And I love mixing patterns together, so I feel like this is kind of like a fun way to mix those patterns together and get to play with pattern paper. So, I don't know, just fun that way. So I had some pieces that were slightly smaller than 3x4. I want to say they were maybe like 2.5x4 or 2.25x4. And I'm going to mat those down and just kind of play with the paper for a little while. So because I'm playing with the paper for a little while, I'm just going to play some music for you. I just have had a long day of teaching today, so I don't feel like having a really long me talking for a while. So I'll just play some music for you and then I'll hop back on after I'm done that. Okay, so once I had all of my pattern papers down, kind of creating a mat, I'm going to add my sentiments. So I just grabbed out a few different stamp sets from my stash, and I'm just going to stamp each of the sentiments 2 or 3 times on some white cardstock. Well, it's actually the back of those pieces of paper that I was showing you earlier. And then I'll cut those out or punch those out, and those will be my sentiments for the page. And I love how that just adds a little pop of white too. And now that all of my cards have a sentiment on them, I'm just going to finish them off with some embellishments. So I decided to add some of these fussy cut out florals that I cut out of that one paper, just because they're super cute and add a really fun detail. I'll also add some sequins and some cork heart embellishments to each card. And then when I'm all done, I'll come back and show you the finished product. Well, there you have it. All of my cards are done, and I love the way that they turned out. Thanks so much for joining me today as to check out all of my cards. I'm just going to slow it down for a minute and show you the finished product so you can check them out. If you want to see detailed shots of these cards and see the products that I've used and more details of how to put them together, head on over to the Wild Whisper blog where you can find all of the details. And don't forget to check out my channel every Tuesday and Thursday for new videos. And if you're interested in seeing other inspiration for how you can scrap your scraps, I do have a Scrap Your Scraps Facebook group that you can check out. There's lots of lovely people over there sharing Scrap Your Scrap type projects. And if you want to see more from me, I do have a playlist just on Scrap Your Scraps with layouts, projects, cards, DIY embellishments, all made with my scraps. Other than that, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me, liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I hope that you have a lovely day.